I never thought one drunken night would shatter the line between love and betrayal. But it did. I stumbled into the house, still dizzy from the party, only to find him waiting, calm, concerned, and impossibly close. When his hands touched my shoulders to steady me, something shifted. His eyes held more than just fatherly concern, and in that moment I knew. Everything was about to change. My name is Emily, and I'm 19 years old. For as long as I can remember, it's just been me and my dad, Mark. My mom left us when I was barely 5, disappearing without a trace. Growing up, Dad was my rock, the one who made me feel safe when the world felt too big and scary. He worked hard to give me the best life possible, often sacrificing his own needs to make sure I never felt like I was missing out. Despite the challenges, we built a quiet, comfortable life together. Our small home was filled with laughter, late-night movie marathons, and early-morning pancakes. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. When I graduated high school and started college, things began to change. I got caught up in the whirlwind of classes, new friendships, and endless parties. Dad encouraged me to live my life, but never stopped worrying. I'd catch glimpses of it in his eyes whenever I came home late or forgot to call. I noticed how lonely he looked sometimes, sitting in the kitchen with his cup of coffee or scrolling endlessly on his phone when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't hard to see, he missed me and I missed him too. One night after a particularly wild party, I came home drunk. Dad was sitting on the couch, waiting like he always did. His strong, broad frame still looked as protective as ever, but that night, something felt different. He stood up as soon as I stumbled through the door, his eyes scanning me with concern. "Emily, you're a mess," he said softly, helping me steady myself. I laughed it off, but the way his hands lingered on my shoulders, warm and firm, sent a shiver down my spine. I blamed the alcohol, convinced it was nothing. But as I looked up at him, his eyes lingered too long, just enough to make my breath hitch. I turned quickly, heading to my room, trying to shake off the feeling. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the way his touch felt. Too tender, too careful, too much like something it shouldn't be. Let me know when you'd like the rising tension section. The days after that night felt different, like an invisible thread had tightened between us, pulling us closer but leaving an unsettling weight in the air. I told myself I was imagining things, that the alcohol had played tricks on me. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the way Dad looked at me lingered in my thoughts. He acted the same, kind, protective, and attentive, but I started noticing the little things. The way his eyes followed me when I walked into a room. The way he hesitated before leaving for work, as if he didn't want to go. And most of all, the way his touch lingered whenever he brushed past me. One evening, after another late night out, I came home and found him sitting in the dimly lit living room, scrolling through his phone. I froze for a second, expecting the usual questions. Where had I been? Who was I with? But instead, he just looked up and smiled. "Did you have fun?" he asked, his voice calm, but something about it made my skin prickle. "Yeah," I said quickly, stepping toward my room. But as I passed, he reached out and gently caught my arm. "Emily, wait," he said softly, his hand warm against my skin. I worry about you. You're out so late these days, and I don't want anything bad to happen to you." His words were caring, but his tone sent a wave of nervous energy through me. I nodded and muttered something about being careful before retreating to my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to him, his voice, his touch, the way his eyes lingered on mine just a second too long. The next morning, I tried to brush it off and act normal. But when I came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, I caught him staring. It was brief, barely a second before he looked away, but it was enough. My stomach flipped, and a strange heat rose in my chest. Things only escalated from there. I started testing the boundaries without even realizing it, wearing shorter shorts around the house, brushing past him a little too closely, leaning in when I talked. It was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. And then one night it happened. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and there he was, shirtless and leaning against the counter. I froze, my eyes tracing the lines of his toned chest and the tattoos that peeked out from his arms. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I shook my head, unable to find the words. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine, and the air between us grew thick. "Me neither," he said softly, his hand brushing against mine as he took the glass. I should have pulled away, I knew that, but instead I stayed. His touch lingered, and so did his gaze. Everything about that moment felt dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff, and knowing one step forward would send you falling. I didn't move. Neither did he. Let me know when you're ready for the escalation of forbidden feelings section. The tension between us became impossible to ignore. Every glance lingered too long, every accidental touch felt intentional, and every word seemed loaded with meaning. It was wrong, I knew that, but I couldn't stop the way my body responded whenever he was near. One evening, the electricity in the house went out during a storm. Rain hammered against the windows, and the room was dimly lit by the soft glow of candles Dad had set up. The flickering light danced across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the faint shadow of stubble. "I guess we're stuck like this for a while," he said, his voice low and steady as he handed me a blanket. I wrapped it around myself, but the chill didn't fade. Maybe it wasn't the storm outside, but the storm inside me that made me shiver. "Come here," he said softly, patting the couch beside him. "You look freezing." I hesitated for only a second before sitting down, the heat of his body radiating toward me. He draped part of the blanket over his shoulders, pulling it around us both. The closeness made my heart pound, and I knew he could feel it because his arm brushed mine, slow, deliberate. "Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I thought about him in ways I shouldn't, that my skin burned every time he touched me, that the idea of him made me feel alive and terrified all at once. Instead, I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. His arm slid around me, his fingers brushing against my arm in soft, deliberate strokes. My pulse quickened, and I turned slightly to look at him. The air shifted as his eyes met mine. There was no mistaking what I saw in them: want, hesitation, and something deeper. "Dad," I whispered, but the word barely left my lips before his hand cupped my face, his thumb tracing my cheek. "Emily," he said softly, as if testing the weight of my name on his tongue. For a moment we were frozen, two people balancing on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. And then it happened. His lips brushed against mine, gentle, questioning. My body tensed, but not from fear. It was need. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned in, letting the kiss deepen. His arms tightened around me, pulling me closer as the heat between us burned away every thought of right or wrong. His hands moved slowly, carefully, tracing the curve of my back, my waist, and down to my hips. My breath hitched as his touch left a trail of fire in its wake. "Are you sure?" he murmured against my lips, his voice thick with restraint. I looked into his eyes, seeing the same hunger and hesitation I felt, and nodded. "Yes." He lifted me effortlessly, carrying me toward the dimly lit bedroom. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and every step felt heavier than the last. When we reached the bed, he laid me down carefully, as if I might break. But there was nothing fragile about the way my body responded to his. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word pushed me further into the fire I couldn't escape, and didn't want to. His hands roamed my body with both familiarity and hesitation, like he was memorizing every inch of me and battling his own doubts all at once. But each touch melted away the guilt, leaving only heat and longing behind. As his lips traveled down my neck, I arched into him, silently begging for more. The storm outside raged on, but inside we were lost in our own. Time blurred, and by the time it was over, we lay tangled in each other, the weight of what had just happened settling over us like a heavy blanket. I looked up at him, searching for regret in his eyes, but all I saw was tenderness. "This changes everything," I whispered. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch lingering. "I know," he said, his voice steady but soft. "And I don't regret it. Neither did I. Let me know when you're ready for the climax and discovery section." The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances, lingering touches, and whispered words that felt heavier than they should. But beneath the surface, guilt simmered. I knew what we had done couldn't stay hidden forever. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone, Dad walked in, his face tight with unease. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. My stomach dropped. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair before sitting down across from me. "This whatever it is between us, it's dangerous, Emily." His words hit like a slap, but I couldn't let him finish. "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't do this. Don't act like you regret it, because I don't." His eyes softened, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. "It's not about regret," he said. "It's about what happens if someone finds out. What this could do to us." I felt my chest tighten. The thought of losing him, of losing this connection we'd built, made me feel like I couldn't breathe. But before I could respond, the front door opened. "Emily? Are you home?" I froze. It was my best friend, Rachel. Dad shot me a warning look, and I quickly stood, meeting Rachel at the door. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "What are you doing here?" She looked past me, spotting Dad in the kitchen. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Am I interrupting something?" I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "No, of course not. We were just talking about school stuff." Rachel studied me for a moment before shrugging. "Okay. I just came by to drop off your jacket from the other night." She handed it to me, then glanced back at Dad. "Hi, Mr. Carter." He nodded, offering a polite smile. "Hey, Rachel." As soon as she left, I turned to Dad, my heart pounding. "She doesn't know anything," I said quickly. But he didn't look reassured. Instead, he stood and walked toward me, his expression serious. "Emily, we can't keep pretending this won't come out. Someone's going to figure it out eventually." Tears welled in my eyes. "So what? Are you saying we should just pretend it never happened?" He reached out, pulling me into his arms. "No," he whispered. "I'm saying we need to be careful." But no amount of careful planning could stop what happened next. That weekend, I went to another party, desperate to clear my head and escape the storm of emotions swirling inside me. But the alcohol only made things worse. I drank too much, and before I knew it, I was sitting outside on the steps, tears streaming down my face. Rachel found me. "Emily? What's going on?" she asked, kneeling beside me. I tried to brush her off, but the alcohol loosened my tongue. "It's complicated," I muttered. She wouldn't let it go. "Tell me. You can trust me." And so I did. The words poured out before I could stop them. The late nights, the lingering touches, the way Dad looked at me like I was the only person who mattered. Rachel's face turned pale. "Emily, do you even hear yourself? That's not normal. That's not okay." I sobered up fast, panic clawing at my chest. "You can't tell anyone," I said, grabbing her arm. "Please." But I saw it in her eyes, fear, disgust, and something else. Judgment. "I have to," she said. I begged her not to, but it was too late. The damage was done. The next morning, Dad found me curled up on the couch, my phone buzzing nonstop with messages from Rachel. "What's going on?" he asked, sitting down beside me. I couldn't bring myself to say it. But then the knock came. It was the police. Time seemed to freeze as they stood in the doorway, asking questions I couldn't answer, their eyes flicking between me and Dad with suspicion. Everything we had tried to hide came crashing down. I saw the panic in Dad's eyes, but he kept his voice steady as he answered their questions, trying to downplay everything. But Rachel's accusations had planted a seed of doubt, and no amount of explaining could make it go away. When they finally left, Dad turned to me, his face pale. "We can't stay here," he said. I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "We need to leave. Tonight." And just like that, everything changed. We packed our bags in silence, the weight of what we had done hanging heavy in the air. As we drove away from the only home I'd ever known, I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel's words. How wrong this was, how it could never last. But as Dad reached over and took my hand, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to let him go. "Let me know when you're ready for the fallout and consequences section." We drove through the night, leaving behind the life we had built and the secrets we could no longer hide. The hum of the engine filled the silence between us, but it couldn't drown out the storm of emotions raging inside me. Fear, guilt, and something even more dangerous, hope. I kept glancing at Dad, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He hadn't spoken since we left, and that terrified me more than anything. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he said, his voice tight. "Somewhere far from here. Somewhere safe." Safe? Was that even possible? Could we ever escape what we had done? I leaned back against the seat, my chest aching. The world outside the window blurred into darkness, and for the first time, I wondered if we'd made a mistake, if running would only make things worse. By morning, we were miles away from home, parked outside a cheap motel. Dad handed me a key and told me to wait inside while he made a few calls. I paced the room, my nerves on edge. The walls felt too close, the air too heavy. When he finally returned, his expression was unreadable. "We can stay here for a while," he said, dropping a bag of takeout on the table. "Just until we figure things out." I nodded, but the tension between us was suffocating. I wanted to reach out, to feel the warmth of his touch, but the weight of what we'd done hung between us like a wall. Days passed in a haze. We barely left the room, afraid someone might recognize us. Dad spent most of his time on the phone, looking for jobs or places to stay, while I sank deeper into my thoughts. One night, as I sat on the bed staring at the TV, Dad sat down beside me. "We can't keep living like this," he said, his voice low. Tears welled in my eyes. "I know, but I don't know how to fix it." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "We can't go back, Emily. But we can move forward, together." His words should have comforted me, but instead, they filled me with dread. Moving forward meant leaving everything behind: friends, dreams, and any chance of a normal life. And deep down, I wasn't sure if I could live with that. The next morning, I woke up to find Dad sitting at the table, staring at his phone. "They found us," he said, his voice hollow. My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "Rachel. She's been talking. People are looking for us. We can't stay here." Panic surged through me. "What are we going to do?" "We'll leave tonight," he said, already packing our things. But as the hours passed, doubt crept in. Running wouldn't fix this. It would only make us look guilty. And then came the knock. I froze. Dad stood, his face pale. "Stay here," he said, stepping toward the door. I watched from the window as 2 officers stepped out of a car. My chest tightened. It was over. Dad turned back to me, his eyes filled with fear. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice shaking. But I knew the truth. We couldn't handle this. No one could. The officers entered the room, and everything unraveled. I told myself I'd be strong, but as they took Dad away, I fell apart. The look he gave me as they let him out, full of regret and love, shattered what little strength I had left. And as I sat in that empty motel room, the reality hit me like a punch to the gut. We'd crossed a line we could never uncross. And now we were paying the price. Let me know when you're ready for the resolution and moral reflection section. The days after Dad was taken felt like a blur. Endless hours of questioning, waiting, and wondering if my life would ever be the same again. The motel room felt emptier without him, and the silence pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I kept replaying the moments we shared, his touch, his voice, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. But now all I felt was shame. Shame for letting it happen. Shame for wanting it. Shame for not stopping it. The world outside moved on, but I felt frozen in time, trapped in the echoes of everything we'd done. When I finally faced him again, it was through a glass wall at the county jail. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, it was like nothing had changed. But the longer I looked, the more I saw, the guilt, the exhaustion, the regret he tried so hard to hide. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears filled my eyes, but I shook my head. Don't say that." "I have to, Emily," he said, pressing his palm against the glass. "I ruined everything. I ruined us." I pressed my hand against his, the glass cold between us. "No. We both made mistakes, but this isn't just your fault." He looked away, his shoulders sagging. "You have to move on. You can't let this define you." His words hit me harder than I expected because deep down I knew he was right. But moving on didn't feel possible, not yet. Over the next few weeks, I started therapy, trying to untangle the mess of emotions inside me. Guilt, love, anger, fear. It felt impossible to sort through, but I knew I had to try. I also faced Rachel again. She couldn't look me in the eye at first, but eventually she apologized. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, tears streaming down her face. And as much as I wanted to hate her, I couldn't. Because she was right. What happened wasn't normal. It wasn't okay. Therapy helped me see that I wasn't alone, that sometimes people confuse love and dependency, especially when they're vulnerable. Dad and I had leaned on each other for so long that the lines between protector and partner blurred. It didn't make what we did right, but it helped me understand why it happened. As the months passed, I started to rebuild my life, focusing on school, making new friends, and learning to forgive myself. I still visit Dad sometimes. He's different now, quieter, more distant, but he always asks how I'm doing, if I'm happy. And every time I leave, I feel the weight of what we lost pressing down on me. But I also feel something else: hope. Hope that I can learn from this. Hope that I can become stronger. Hope that someday, I'll look back and see this as a chapter that taught me more about love, boundaries, and forgiveness than I ever thought possible. Because no matter how much it hurt, I know now that love, real love, should never come with shame. What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? Could you forgive yourself, or someone you loved, for crossing a line that can never be uncrossed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that push boundaries and make you question everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and betrayal. Stay tuned, Another shocking story is coming soon.